This is really a very important topic today, and especially for how law firms and hiring people. And out of the three things that I've examined so far, which is can the attorney do the job? Can they be managed? The idea of whether or not the person really wants the job is, in my opinion, one of the most important things that law firms need to look at when hiring people. And most law firms, by the way, this is the one thing where a lot of them get it wrong. And they get the fact that the person can do the job always, quite frequently, they get that right. But this one is the one where, in the management, they often get that. But this is the one where there tends to be a lot of problems. What I'm going to do is I will talk about this. I'll talk about today's topic. And then after I'm done, I'll answer as many questions as everyone has. So when I was around 9 years old, I remember my mom took me to a farm outside Detroit where I grew up, and my first dog that I picked up was a Brittany Spaniel puppy. And what ended up happening is I walked into the house to the house where there's a room where all the puppies were. One puppy came up to me and kept kissing me and following me around, and then the others were much less interested. And the puppy I finally picked out, my mom asked me why I picked it out, and I told her that I chose it because it seemed like the puppy that really liked me the most. And years later, when I was in law school, I met my first wife, and she was someone else that I ended up connecting with because she said that I seemed like the one that liked her the most of all the people that were interested in her. The idea is that very few people are interested in us. And if someone is interested in us, then we tend to be it's actually a much better fit. And years ago, for example, I had an in-house opening at my company for an in-house counsel, and I literally had hundreds of applicants for the position, and there were so many that it was very difficult to review. People are very interested in in-house positions, and the person that I ended up hiring was not someone I should have hired. It was not by any stretch of the imagination the best hire, but this person walked into my office without an interview, brought her resume, said she wanted the job, that she'd applied before, and really wanted to meet me and believed in the company and myself and all those sorts of things. And that actually is what made me hire her. It was her interest in me and in the job. And that goes a long way. And she actually was committed to the job. She just didn't have the skills really to do the work. And the thing is, when I look at the people that I've become connected to in my life, organizations and so forth, whether it's schools and so forth or different jobs, they were things that I really wanted. And then when people saw that I really wanted things, they ended up taking a chance on me. And the best business decision any law firm can make is hiring people that really want to be there because they're going to be committed, and they're going to really want to be there. And they're not going to be wishy-washy, and they're going to take whatever they're doing very seriously. I remember when I was in high school, my mentor asked me about my first choice school. And when I told him, he told me that he would do whatever he could for me and go there. There was another school that was my first choice, but he told me I'd never get in there. And so my second choice school became my first choice school. And the same thing happened to me in law school, a similar thing. My first choice school was what I told my mentor. And they went out of their way to make sure that those schools knew I was their first choice and called them and did all those sorts of things. So that is very helpful. And people in schools and other organizations really want to hire the best people that are most interested in them. And the thing is that when you're interviewing attorneys, there's always going to be a high proportion of attorneys that really don't want the job, or they don't want to be at your firm, or they don't want to do the type of work you have. They're just biding their time until something better comes along. If your firm doesn't pay as much or is not in the person's practice area, there may be reasons that they don't want to do the work. And so they'll come to your firm and they'll never be fully committed and they'll really never give up trying to find another position. And so the people that you should be hiring are people that really want to work where you have an opening and are there for the right reasons. You shouldn't be hiring people that are necessarily overqualified for the jobs you have, which a lot of firms make the mistake of doing, and those people leave. You shouldn't hire people that are wishy-washy and need to be sold and take a lot of time to decide whether or not whether or not they're going to accept an offer, or they are late for interviews because it's not a priority for them, or the most important criteria, I believe, when you're interviewing and evaluating attorneys is how much they want to be there. And I remember this is a funny story because it's talking about my own lack of success. But when I was in college, I would say that it's at least 30, maybe it's at least 30 or 40, I don't know. But I interviewed with investment banks, consulting firms, and all sorts of other employers for entry-level jobs, not because I really wanted a job, but just because everyone was doing it and I thought I should be doing the same thing. And there was probably no one out there that was worse at interviewing for these jobs than me. And I actually got hired for a job, but it was a huge mistake for the one I ended up getting hired. And I only got hired for one job. And the problem for me was when I was in around 18 years old or maybe 17, I'd started an asphalt business in Detroit. And the business typically would run from the spring to the early fall. And there wasn't a lot of competition in the business. So during the 3 months of the summer, which was basically when I got out of school till I went back to school, I always could make a lot of money, enough to support myself year round. And by the time I was a senior in college, I had earned plenty of money. And I had nice cars and plenty of money to support myself. And I was very independent and not worried about even really working when I got out of school. And my goal really was to do that. I enjoyed it so much. I could have, if I wanted to, do the work in the summers and then I worked in Florida in the winters, or, doing nothing. And so these jobs just did not look exciting to me. And doing one of those jobs compared to the kind of work I was doing meant giving up freedom and working for someone else, and not building this business that was growing each year. Why would I want to be enthusiastic about that? I would go into interviews and I would talk about myself and my asphalt business. That's all I was interested in. And kids were preparing for these interviews and spending hours preparing and why they would be good fits. And the only thing I could think of is, well, I have all this skill doing things on my own. And so when I interviewed for these jobs, I didn't look the part. I didn't talk the part. I had too much confidence. I didn't come across as someone that really wanted the interview to work there. And I liked the idea of it, but I was very conflicted. And why would I want to work for a bank making half the salary I can make if I could go to a top law school right away and make a big salary after doing that? Why would I do any of these things? What I learned very quickly was that most of the kids that I was competing with would never even be able to get into law school. So the point is, and I had other options too. Like I had the option of getting a PhD and getting a stipend. And then I could also work in the summers while I was getting a PhD. I just had other options. And someone with other options is not a good hire. Someone that's not enthusiastic about what you have to offer is not a good hire. Someone that could do something else is not a good hire. And so I even had another job potentially. I could go get a PhD, and that was not good. I'd even interviewed with Harvard Business School, and which is not easy to get an interview there. So it's just, I did that when I was in college and took the GMAT and so forth. And most of the kids were gaining experience. So I was not a good person to interview. And I'm not saying any of this to brag, because I was just, the point is that I had so many different irons in the fire. I had the PhD, I had going to law school, I had what else? Doing the asphalt business. And it's just, that's not the kind of person you want to hire. You don't want to hire someone that doesn't really want to be there. Someone that you hire that should be what their whole focus is, really. And if it's not, they're going to do something else. And at the same time, I was also applying to law schools. And there just was no reason for any person to hire me. And when you see people, by the way, that have a lot of things in their background that indicate that they can be independent, or that they've done things that are much more important than what you're offering, or that they may not need your job, that's something to be very aware of. And I certainly was interviewing for jobs, and it was a very stupid mistake. One trading firm interviewed me in Chicago and asked me where the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange were at. And I told him New York, and he said, no, not where they're located, the Point Range. And then he asked me the difference, and I told him I didn't even know, but I would learn. And these sorts of banters and so forth characterized every interview. And I talked about the wrong things, about things that I'd written. And I have a lot of stories that I could tell, and I don't know that it's important to tell them all, but there's one that was funny. I was at a party once till about 3 a.m. And then I had a callback interview with a firm at 8 a.m. And I went into an interview, and they thought I was a basketball player named Andrew Wong and from Notre Dame, which I didn't go to Notre Dame. And they kept, talking about that and this is before the days of the internet, where they could have looked me up. And they'd gotten me wrong because my first name is actually Andrew. I go by my middle name, which is Harrison. And so they kept calling me Andrew. So I figured everything was okay. And then eventually everyone figured out that I wasn't the right person, and I was just completely out of it that day. So the point I'm making is that when someone's not interested in something, you can tell many times in the interview. They're not connecting with you. There's issues, and I certainly didn't want the job. You don't stay out till 3 a.m. the night of an interview if you really want a job. You don't. You show up prepared, and you very much want to get the position. You know everything about the position, and so I never got a job with an employer on campus. I ended up getting hired for this program at the Justice Department, which was essentially a fellowship where I didn't really have to do much interviewing. And they hired me, and then I ended up going to law school instead. So that was a real mistake for them to hire me. They hired someone that didn't really want the job. And this is the kind of thing that employers do all the time. And I work with people that are lateral into firms. So every day I see countless resumes and attorneys applying and so forth that don't want jobs. And I think that because they don't want the job, that that they're not going to succeed in the next place they go. And many times, by the way, too, it's the people that are the most qualified for your jobs that are the worst people to hire. And the point, when you hire someone that doesn't want the job, they're almost always going to leave. So if they can't convince you they want the job, then it's just a very bad thing to hire them. They'll waste your time training and getting them up to speed. They'll take positions away from people that could be stable. When they leave, they'll undermine the morale of the people that are left. They'll never be fully committed. They're always going to be looking for something else. And it's just not a good thing. So here are some signs that I recommend that all employers look for when you're interviewing and hiring people. And you really need to look at these things because you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble. There's in your own firm right now, there's a good percentage of people that don't want the job, even partners. And figuring out who those people are early on is very important. So the first thing that I always look for when I'm working with attorneys is, and I think law firms should also look for, is that the person's resume may show that they're interested in something else or a different type of employer than you. And that typically is the biggest red flag. And most employers are pretty good at seeing this, but I'll just show you some examples right now. So if a resume or attorney is not interested in working for you or doing your job, there's going to be a lot of stuff on it that looks like they don't belong with you. So their interests are just going to be incompatible with what you're doing and what they've done in the past. And so here's some examples. I saw not too long ago a resume, and I see this a lot now, by the way. I didn't used to see it. I saw a resume of someone that worked in a top New York law firm for 3 years. And all his resume was emphasizing he was working as a litigator was his pro bono experience. So it literally started talking about all this pro bono experience and under his experience. And then at the end, had a line or two about representing corporations in various disputes or something. But when I looked at his resume, the very beginning of his law firm experience talked about everything that you did there that was pro bono. And then he also listed his college and law school, and when he was doing, he was in college and law school, there were all sorts of social justice things. And none of this is wrong. The world needs attorneys like this, but you shouldn't interview someone like this to work in a big law firm because they're not interested in the work. They're interested in helping other people and not necessarily working in a law firm and working for paying clients, or at least the kind of clients most law firms have. So that wouldn't have been a good hire. I saw another attorney actually a couple of weeks ago, and this attorney worked in was an entertainment law society and law school, on an entertainment journal, worked in an entertainment company a year before law school and then after college, and also worked for entertainment their first and second summers of law school. And then they went to a large law firm doing mass tort litigation, and they've been there for over a year. And then this attorney wants to move from Los Angeles to Chicago. And this particular attorney said they're interested in mainly entertainment, but also general litigation jobs. And so if this person were hired, first of all, they never should have probably been hired for a mass tort litigation job, because the odds of them doing a mass tort litigation job were very slim. They certainly weren't going to stick with that because everything on their resume pointed to entertainment law. And then now they're leaving Chicago, by the way, to go to LA because they want to get an entertainment law. So if a firm in Los Angeles were to interview this person for a litigation job, that would be a huge mistake because they're moving from Chicago to Los Angeles. All they want to do is entertainment related work from their resume, and they're just taking something until they get something new. And that's a bad hire. But law firms don't see that stuff many times. They miss it and they hire this kind of people. And so if they were hired by a firm in Los Angeles, they would not stay. And they would basically be looking for an entertainment related job all the time, and that would not work. So then there was another attorney I was working with a little while ago as well. We went to a top 10 law school and got a job with a major law firm as a summer associate, and then after law school. They worked there for 1 year. Then he decided to go work at an in-house company in Washington, D.C. After 6 months at his in-house position, he was laid off. And he got hired as a staff attorney at a major firm in the Midwest. And now he's looking for anything he can get. He wants an in-house job, a law firm job, or anything else in his current position. The law firm in the Midwest never should have hired him. He clearly did not want to be a staff attorney. There was nothing in his resume to indicate he would stay with that. There was nothing in his resume to indicate that he would want to work in the Midwest. It was just a dumb move. And just because he went to a good law school, all this guy was doing was talking about how much he hated the firm, how the work was below him and so forth. And I don't know why the law firm hired him. He said something to the effect of, they helped me, but now I need to help myself or something. I don't know. Was when I asked him why he went to work there. And so this person's objective is going to be to get a position with another law firm or in-house. That's what they're going to try to do. And he's going to want to be in a big city, and he wants to work with in the same caliber of firm or do something that looks good to his friends or other people he may have gone to law school with. He should not have been hired. But law firms do this all the time. I mean, they hire people that shows they're interested in something different. And that's one reason why many times hiring attorneys from in-house or other practice settings is just not a smart idea. Another thing that I don't like, and I think is also a big warning sign, are attorneys who've had several different jobs in a short period. An attorney may have worked in 3 or 4 law firms in 5 years or even 6 years, and this attorney is not going to stay. There are certain people that wherever they go will find reasons not to stay and to have problems with the employer. And who knows if they're finding themselves or what they're doing. It's not your problem, and you need to move on and find someone else, because even if they have good reasons for working with you, the odds are they're not going to stay. Now, there are some exceptions to that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Sometimes attorneys, they have just a bad start. I don't know, maybe they start off in a really small firm and then they move to a bigger firm, and then maybe they move to an even bigger firm, a better firm. So there are people that are have upward mobility, and those kind of people can be hired if you believe that they'll stay with you if they're hired. But other than that, it can be very risky. I've seen other attorneys do things like, if you have an attorney that spent their entire career working in a market like Texas, for example, and then suddenly is applying to jobs nationwide. And you may be interviewing them for a job in Pittsburgh. You question them and you discover why they're interested in the job you have, and their family and everyone they know is in Texas. This is very common, by the way, to interview attorneys like this. And the odds are that even if you hire them for your position, they are going to be returning to Texas in the future. They will find a reason to go back, and their whole family's there. They've grown up there. They've always worked there. You're almost always better off hiring someone locally. It's a huge mistake. They may be able to convince you that they want the job because they need money or something in the short term, but they're never going to stay. And I've just seen countless examples like this. And you have to be very aware of this, and you have to be very careful, because if you hire people like this, they're going to leave, and it's just not a good idea. Yeah, when I was interviewing for positions when I was in college, it should have been very clear to anybody who looked at my resume that I wanted something different. I had written all sorts of research papers to help people in Detroit get jobs. I was interested in kind of what I'm doing now, to be honest with you, but classes and all these things was completely incompatible with the crunching numbers. And in a banker, someone like me would not be happy doing that. And no one should have interviewed me. It was a mistake, just because why would you interview someone to crunch numbers that has everything on their resume has nothing to do with that? And I'd done about and bragged about all the stuff I'd done independently. So you just need to really look at resumes very closely and see what's important to the person. And for me, obviously working in a bank was not important and would have been a huge mistake. So what you need to look at is you need to look at specialists that are committed to their practice area, which I always recommend, your location and the practice setting. Those are the 3 main things, that the person's not trying to switch practice areas. They know what they want to do or the type of work they want to do. They want to work in the location, and they have reasons for being in your location. And they also want to work in a law firm practice setting. And you also need to make sure that the person's committed to working at a firm of your size and your pay and your prestige level, and has reasons for doing so. If the person's moving down in terms of the prestige level, there better be very good reasons. If the person is moving up, and maybe hopefully it's because they're motivated and want to get into a much better firm. If the attorney can get closer to what really matches what they're trying to do, then they will. And if they don't, an example is when I started practicing law a few decades ago, the salaries were much different than they are now. In Los Angeles, the best firms were paying their associates, I think, $85,000 or $90,000 a year. And there were a few New York-based firms who were paying people at my level. I think like Dewey Ballantyne and Skadden and Sullivan Cromwell and a couple others were paying about $150,000 or $55,000 on top of bonuses. So you could make pretty good money. And so for me, it was really a no-brainer to take one of those 5 or 6 jobs after having started a firm that didn't pay as much. And when I was at the New York-based firm, I was unhappy, and I started interviewing with these Los Angeles-based firms that were paying these salaries that at the time were, with bonuses and everything, were about half. And I got offers from some of them, but none of them should have made offers because there was no reason that I would want to make so much less money. Like, why would anybody do that? So it's very dangerous to interview people that are making a lot more money too and want to make less money, because many times they won't stay or they'll feel like they're not being compensated the same for their time. And you just need to be very careful and really figure out why you're hiring, why the person would really want the job. The other thing that I think you need to look at very closely is that if the person you're interviewing wants the job, they're typically never going to be unemployed very long. And I speak all the time, every day. There's unemployed attorneys that I'm speaking with, and many of these attorneys have been unemployed for a long time. And there's a lot of things that they have in common. There's always reasons beyond someone's control, or they always say that there's reasons why they're unemployed. But in my opinion, there's so many jobs out there for attorneys. There's so many jobs in so many places most attorneys can work that I honestly, and then this is not a nice thing to say, but I don't think there's really a very good explanation, unless there's like a family emergency or health problems or something, for being unemployed very long, because there's always places where attorneys can work, even in the worst depressions and everything. There's always been plenty of places. And I think that one of the reasons people stay unemployed is really most, and that's employed. When I wasn't getting positions in college, I got so many interviews, but I didn't get jobs because I wanted to be unemployed. I didn't go to interview workshops. Someone that really wanted a job would have learned what they were doing wrong in their interviews. I didn't go to resume workshops to take off all this crap on my resume that didn't work. I didn't get feedback from the career services after these horrible interviews. I didn't research the employers well before interviewing with them. I didn't talk to students who were getting interviews and doing well and seeing what they were doing and model their behavior. I didn't show up on time for all the interviews. I didn't send thank you notes. I didn't appear very eager in interviews to get the jobs. I didn't show the interviews the respect, the profound respect that they deserve, because they had a job that I could work at and because they didn't want to do the work. And I often talked a big game, but it was all wrong. And that was because I was conflicted. So when you're interviewing people and they're conflicted, all these things aren't going to happen. Not everyone has to write a thank you note, of course. People that really want the job are going to come across as very well qualified for the job. And excuse me. And so I was more conflicted about whether I wanted the job or not. And that's what attorneys that are conflicted do. They're uncertain about whether or not they want the job. And so they're going to send out the wrong signals. And you'll see things on their resume. And when you talk to them and ask them the reason why, it'll come out and it'll be very clear. One attorney I was working with had been in a very good New York law firm, and he'd been there over a year in their corporate department, and then was let go because he had low hours. And then I asked him, I said, why did you lose your job? And he said, the firm required me to be in the office at 8 a.m. every day. When the managing partner gave out or 8 a.m. when the managing partner in another office emailed out assignments once a week, or people you could work for. And he said he wasn't there to beg for work, and if they had work for him to do, he would do it. So this particular guy obviously didn't want this job. If you want to work someplace, you're going to be there at 8 a.m., even if everyone gets into your office at 10, to get the assignments when they come out. And if he really wanted a position, he would have also been able to get one in the past year. He went to a great law school. He had worked at a great firm. He didn't want the job. He didn't want the job he was in before, and he didn't want to get a job now. Another attorney I was working with not too long ago had worked for a major firm in Boston. And then he got a position in-house in Colorado, and it took him over. He'd been looking for a job for over a year, and he was let go from his job in Colorado. He was let go from his in-house job because he said he didn't go to in-house to work big firm hours. So they basically got rid of him. And this particular guy wasn't interested in working. He probably had this idea he was going to move to Colorado with his big firm pedigree and have a nice life. And I tried to get him. He was kind of like one of the smaller not a smaller market, but he wasn't in Denver. He was in a smaller market than that. And I tried to get him to apply to firms outside of the city he was in, and he refused. And he'd apparently saved a lot of money, and he just wasn't interested in doing anything but applying to openings, and really was icing himself out of a new position. And he didn't have a lot of interest. And there's a lot of people like this. There's a lot of people out there that don't really want to work, or they only want to work at things that sound good to them. I also, not too long ago, interviewed a girl who graduated from law school 9 months before, and I interviewed her for a job with my company. And she'd been offered a position after graduating from law school. And When I interviewed her, she sounded very enthusiastic or I'm sorry, unenthusiastic and not interested in making a connection. And then I asked her to take a personality test. And she said she already knew what the result would be. And she emailed us her personality type. And this person just is someone that didn't want the job and just kept sabotaging. And that's why she was unemployed. She was figuring things out. And so there's all sorts of places where if an attorney really wants a job, they can get a job. And it's not bad luck that they're not getting a job. It's that they really don't want a job. The person that walked into my office with a resume wanted the job. And most people aren't getting jobs because they're not applying in enough places. They're setting conditions for the kind of places they'll work. They're not connecting with interviewers. And these are things that you do if you really want the job. And people that aren't getting jobs are most often in that positions because that's how they want to be. Another example is someone that takes time off. So a lot of time off, and then they may want to come back to a law firm. And certainly there's nothing wrong with people who want to have children. And that's obviously something a lot of people do, and or they get sick or they need to spend time with their family, or these things should not qualify someone who's otherwise qualified to work in a law firm. Of course not. But most people that take a lot of time off don't want to work. They're interested in something else. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with someone that wants to do something else with their time. A lot of times when people do take a lot of time off and try to come back to a law firm or any type of employer, they just don't stay. They believe that they can't get into it again, and they just don't want the job. And they would have, if somebody really wants to work, and they typically will stick with whatever they're doing and not quit, and they'll do it consistently. It's just something to think about. My mother and father got divorced almost 50 years ago. And then each of them, and it might actually be more than 50. No, I think it might actually be more than 50. And each of them had, no, it's not more than 50. What am I talking about? It's almost 50. But each of them had very short second marriages of a year or two. And other than that, they never remarried. Now, if someone wants to get remarried and find a mate, they're going to quickly do so, and they'll do so by any means necessary. If being married, just like being employed, is important to you, you'll do the same. You'll get married. You'll definitely do it. It's not a problem. Anybody that wants a mate will find someone. Anyone that wants a job will find one. I couldn't believe it. This is a funny story, but I had a plumber working in my house about 5 years ago, and he told me that his wife had died of cancer just a few months previously. He was in his late 70s and very slow, and I felt very sorry for him. And I told him I believe that it would probably be very difficult for him to find someone new. And then he came and he said, "No, I'm happier than I've been in a long time. I went over to the Philippines and picked up a wife." I couldn't believe it. I guess he met someone online or something, and they decided to get married very quickly. And then he told me many of his friends had done the same thing. And the point is that he didn't want to be single, and whoever he married didn't want to be single either. And in contrast, my parents, who are getting pretty old, have never been able to settle down. They find all manner of excuses to disqualify potential mates, and have done this as long as I've known them. I got married when I was a baby, but or divorced. But the point is that they want to be single, and so that's it. And so they would be very bad risk for someone to marry, and that's what attorneys do who are not good fits for law firms and shouldn't be hired. They don't want the job. They will stay unemployed for a long time, and the reason they're unemployed really is because they don't want to be employed. People that want to be employed will find jobs. I do an exercise with people all the time where, wherever they are in the world, there's tons of people that do the kind of work that they do. Literally, if it doesn't matter almost, unless you're in the middle of the desert or something, there's always attorneys someone can work for. And then the third thing is that a person who doesn't want the job typically will do the things to look and act the part to get the job. When an attorney really wants a job, they'll say and do what they need to in order to get the job. They'll go to interviews and they'll try to convince you they're a good fit and not the other way around. And they may apply to jobs they don't want. And most attorneys and law students do. So here's some things that attorneys will do, the best people do that show they want the job. So the first one is people that want the job will typically tailor their resume and cover letter to you and your job. So if someone wants the job, they're going to have very good reasons for applying to you. You should read their cover letters and get a sense of if they even are applying to your specific job. I understand a lot of people don't read cover letters, but at the same time, if they really want the job, they're gonna make that clear in their cover letter. And they'll typically, the resume and cover letter should be acting the part. They'll typically also go out of their way to find, and just real quickly, I don't want to get too much into resumes, but if you have a resume for someone to do, say, commercial litigation, they're not going to talk about the fact that they've done corporate transactions and other things on their resume. They're going to make sure that they actually tailor their resume to your job. That's going to show that they really want the job. if you have a resume, if you, and they have, and their cover letter typically will talk about why they could be a good fit for your job. And they'll do all these things to really stick out and look like they're good fits for your job. And that's what attorneys do that really want something. They will do whatever they can to look like they're the best fits for your job. And it's just how it works. And the resume will do that, and the cover letter will do that. And most people don't do that, but if it is happening, then that's a good sign. The other thing is people will typically go out of their way to find people that they know. They'll learn about your firm, and they'll find ways to get your attention before they even apply. So if someone wants your job, they're going to talk to others in your law firm. They're going to talk to people who've worked there if they can, and they'll do that before applying. And they'll often include this information in the cover letters they sent you. So they'll have done their homework, and they're going to want to connect to people in your firm if they can. And they're going to do everything they possibly can to look like the best fits possible for your position. And they will do that consistently. That's what people do that really want the job. They're going to always look like the part, and they'll do whatever they can to make sure that they know people or they have things to talk about. They're also going to show up for interviews prepared. They're going to read everything. They're going to read everything they can about your firm. They will know everything about it. They will have questions that are very focused, and they'll know those things. And if they don't, and they act distracted and they don't know things and they don't really want the job, they're also going to come across as quite animated, interested, and they're going to say and do the right things in their interviews to show that they want the job. They're going to be selling you on why they're a good fit. They're going to be very enthusiastic, and they're going to come across that way. And they're going to say things that are going to likely make you, they're not going to say things that are going to make you not like them. And they're going to know how to, not what to say. And they're not going to ask you about bad news about your firm. They're going to want to keep everything positive, and they're going to try to connect with people the best they can and be very nice and solicitous to some extent. And that's important. So the level of enthusiasm is very important. Someone that really wants the job is going to act a certain way. They're also going to show up on time. A lot of times people will intentionally sabotage interviews by showing up late. And that's just, I don't know why they do that, but it's very common. And it's just something that people do that are not interested in the job. When I was newly single years ago, I started noticing that many people out there could quickly pick up if I was interested in them or not, and vice versa. And one woman I met told me to call her the next day to plan something, and I didn't. And when I finally reached out to her, she didn't pick up, and then sent me a text saying she wasn't interested in playing games. And she was right. I was calling her, but I wasn't, I just almost out of obligation. And so I found a way, I came up with an excuse not to call her. And if I had really been interested in her, I would have found a way to call her the next day. And so that was the smart thing for her to do. And so I stopped basically that pursuit, and I wasn't interested. And so she figured that out, and that was great. That was very smart of her. And then another time I had someone else trying to spend a lot of time with me, and then she was often late, and we canceled at the last minute. And that was something that I also broke off, because I realized that if she was interested, then she wouldn't have been playing all these games, and I would have been the priority. And it's the same thing. It's like that with everything. And like I don't know why I'm telling all these personal examples, but I guess they're interesting and relevant. That I had one of my relationships years ago, this is a long time ago, I decided to go to therapy. And then my ex showed up to the therapy dressed very poorly and not looking good. And I realized then that had that been something that she was really interested in or wanting to get back together, she probably would have made more of an effort. And so the point is that when you're interviewing people that want something, they're not going to show up. They're going to show up and they're going to look and act their best. And that's just how it works. And the more they do that, the better. So here's some of the biggest things that I recommend looking for to see if someone really wants the job. And these are the ones that I think are the most important. And I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but the first thing is that your firm really represents a move up for the person. So like attorneys that are worth hiring, a lot of times will have some sort of upward mobility in the resume. Now, upward mobility doesn't mean moving to a bigger firm. It may represent moving to a firm where they believe they can get business in order to move upward, and a smaller firm. Or it means moving to a firm where they can be a partner. It means maybe moving to a firm where there is more of the type of work that they want to do, or where they can. So there's all sorts of things. But however your firm looks to them, the firm should represent a move up to the person. It should look like it represents the natural evolution of the attorney's career and their self-realization that if they are able to work with you, then great things are going to happen. And that they're finally reaching a place that all of their past experience and everything points to. An example would be that the person has been doing a certain practice area and a certain type of case, for example, or a certain type of transaction most of their career, and they've had an interest in this transaction since they were working on things like this since they were in college or law school, and then they've worked at a variety of places that have all allowed them to develop this transactional skill or litigation skill. But your firm finally represents them arriving at where they should be. And that's how you need to think about these things. So your firm really should offer the attorney a unique combination of benefits, such as the the location, the type of people they'll be working with, the cultural fit, and other things that they're not going to find elsewhere. And the attorney should be able to communicate that to you. And if you see that, then that's a good hire because you want people to stay. And if they can convince you of that and they've thought through this, why you're a good fit for them, they're going to do very well. And then the other thing that I just touched on, but there should be something in the background of the attorney that indicates a commitment to work in their practice area and improving. If you're hiring someone for a particular practice area, they should be committed to that. And you want to see people that have a certain interest in a certain type of work. I love it when I see attorneys that have worked with certain people and they've given lots of presentations, they've brought in business, and they've done all these different types of things to look very good at things, to look very good at what they're doing. And that is very powerful. And I recommend trying to find people that I love when I see outside interest in something, because that means the person's likely to stick with something. People that are going around and promoting themselves and their skills and writing and talking about it on their free time typically are very good risk and committed and will want the job if you have something that's going to allow them to improve. I talked earlier about the cover letter and resume fitting your position, but the more that's tailored, the better. I also talked more earlier about the person learning everything they can about you. So if people have stupid questions, if people don't really know what you do and don't connect that with their interest, then that's never a great sign. And then other people the best hires will typically use their preparation time to psych themselves up and not down. They'll come in wanting to work there and not asking questions that may give you pause about if they really want that. And then one of the final things that I think is, and it's not the final one, but it's one of the more important ones, is the practice settings that the attorney's chosen. So, the attorney should be committed to your practice setting. If an attorney's worked in other practice settings, then that means they may not be committed to the way a law firm works. And that's not a good sign. And people that are committed to law firms, not committed to law firms and leave law firms typically do because there's things that they don't like about a law firm, which is the hours or the competition for business or who knows. But that means they're just going to have those problems again, typically, and they're going to leave again. That's just something that every law firm should keep in mind. And then the other thing is that if an attorney is committed to your geographic location, you really need to be aware of that. One of the best people to hire are attorneys that are from an area. So if someone's from, like, I don't know, Cleveland, and they're relocating to Cleveland from Chicago because they want to be closer to their family or raise their family there, then that's a great sign. The person's probably going to stay in Cleveland. So that's always good. If the attorney is always historically worked in a certain geographic location, that's also good. And if the attorney has very strong connections somewhere else, the odds of them remaining with you are not good at all. You need to be, very aware that if the attorney has connections with another location, they're not going to stay. And then the other thing that I touched on today is that someone needs to be consistently employed. Attorneys that are consistently employed, there's a reason for that. It's because they want to be employed. And if they're unemployed a lot, that may be a sign that they've lost jobs, they've done something wrong, or they've just, the pressure of it's too much. You don't know. But those types of attorneys will also typically leave. And attorneys who do not want or do not need work are frequently unemployed for long periods of time. And the other thing is an attorney that really wants to work for you will try very hard to bond with your attorneys. So they'll try to bond with your human resources people. They'll try to bond with other people, and they'll do whatever they can to be very likable along the way. And they'll be very eager. Now, that's not to say everybody's going to be like this, but the more you see that, the better. And if they're unsure about the job, then they may be flippant and not excited. And you can kind of, you can see their attitude, even sometimes just sitting in the waiting room. And most attorneys should be convincing you to hire them, and you shouldn't have to convince them to do that. That's just not good. And then the other thing is that the attorney will always be on time, and almost all the time. Sometimes people are unavoidably late, but they'll also typically accept offers very rapidly, almost typically the same day or within a day, just to look good. And those are people that really want the job. And if someone's sitting on an offer, they're almost always going to leave. They won't If they're sitting on the offer for a long period of time, that means you're not their first choice and they will leave. And I don't recommend keeping offers open too long. My big point today and is that you just don't want to hire someone that doesn't really clearly want the job. And figuring this out early on is important. If the person shows this on their resume, that's a good sign. But if the person acts, the way they act in the interviews and how they show up is going to most often show how much they want the job. And if the attorney, if you sense they're not interested in you and that sort of thing, then it's probably best just to pass on them. You're going to be better off, much better off hiring an attorney that really does want the job. Okay, so I've got some questions. Let me just see here, and I will take those. And as many questions as people have today, I'm happy to answer. Let's see here, and let me just do one thing here and open a document. Here we go, and put these in here. Okay. So the first question is, which is a good question, what happens to large law firms that consistently make bad hires, i.e. passing on people that are eager to work there and hiring people who ultimately want to leave? Well, so those types of law firms have a much higher cost often of doing business. So they will bring in a lot of laterals, and they'll typically, a lot of times, they'll hire based on the person's pedigree. So they'll hire based on the quality of the person's resume and so forth, and they won't pay as much attention as they probably should to whether or not the person wants to work there. And that actually has a lot of long-term negative consequences. It just increases their cost of doing business. It can be difficult culturally and so forth. So a law firm definitely has a different type of thing, it's not a smart thing for firms to do. Okay, so Org has created a new category of PTO called unplugged time, during which associates and partners are not supposed to check email, take calls, or do any work 40 hours a year. Org's a great firm, by the way, and they count towards bonus eligibility. Do you think that would become a larger trend among law firms? Oric's a great law firm, and they typically just have really been on top of being a good place to work and making things good for attorneys. And I like that. I think that's a very smart thing that they're doing, this unplugged time. And I hope that does become a trend among law firms. Oric seems to figure out a lot of very good management things in terms of making people, happy there. And that's a very interesting firm to watch. It's been from the 1990s until now, and I watched them really make a lot of very interesting decisions and stuff. But I hope that becomes a trend among firms. I don't know that it will become a trend among all firms, because I think a lot of firms are very conscious about anything that interferes with billable hours and giving an attorneys making money. But it's interesting if you look at Judaism, and it's one of the oldest religions, and all religions to some extent, but Judaism is over 4,000 years old. They have a Shabbat, which is you're not supposed to do any work every week from sundown on Friday till sunset on Saturday, and it's one of the oldest religious traditions out there. And then you have even Buddhism, where you're trying to quiet the mind and not think or do anything. And you have all these different religions, or Christianity, where you take the Sabbath, which I guess is Sunday, and some places it's actually Saturday. But so the idea of unplugging and stuff is smart, and I think that people are much more effective when they unplug. And I wish law firms would do that more. It actually makes the quality of the work of the attorneys better. It makes people happier. And I would think that would be something that a lot of law firms should and would do in the future. I think it's a very smart thing for law firms to do, and it makes the attorneys more effective, and then it's actually a better service to clients because the attorneys are more effective. Work. Okay, let's see here. All good questions. Yeah, as many questions as people have, I will answer. We typically don't get as many questions on this meeting. We do have a meeting also this is the law firm meeting, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And then on Wednesdays, we always have a big meeting too for attorneys, the candidates, and they always ask a lot of questions too. There's always a lot more questions in that meeting. Okay, which firms actually give you the best springboard in a public company corporate roles that lead to promotions to GC and so forth down the road? Firms don't really advertise their public company representation, though some firms have practice groups. Leaving aside the Vol 3, is it certain Vol 10s and the more California tech-friendly firms doing the IPOs? So the biggest firms, the firms that are going to give you the best leg up and going in-house are always going to be the ones that do most of the type of work that you want to do. And the only reason for that is because those firms will charge a lot of money and have a good reputation among the largest companies. And so those companies will always be happy to get attorneys from them. If you are trying to become a GC of a major company, you're always better off trying to stay in a big firm many times as long as you possibly can, and becoming a partner there, and even an equity partner for the biggest companies, because a lot of the biggest companies will basically hire people that have been partners in law firms instead of just avoiding moving people up the chain from someone that might have been a couple years as an associate in a big law firm. Most firms do talk about who their the representation is. There are lists out there. I've seen them, and just in their public list, and because I do research about this stuff all the time. And I don't know what they are offhand, but there's all sorts of lists that will show you the clients of different firms and who they are. But typically, as a general rule of thumb, the most prestigious firms represent the most prestigious and largest clients and in their corporate work. And the more prestigious corporate firm you get into, and the larger firm in the larger market, the more likely it's going to be for you to be able to move to one of those firms. There is a kind of a schism. So there's firms that work in California, and then there's firms that work in New York. New York has always had a little bit of advantage, and I'm in California, so I certainly, don't have anything negative to say about California firms, but in terms of corporate related work, there's always been a little bit more of a prestige level among New York firms compared to California firms, that the work's a little more thorough, a little better. I don't know that's true, but that's just the kind of this history of the way people have thought, because New York used to be the only center of finance, and now certainly the Bay Area has a huge presence, and there's a lot of other markets. But if you want to be in a corporate role in a big public company, the best places to work are typically going to be in the biggest markets. So New York is probably the best and always will be, I think, or at least for the time being. And then you have other markets like that are big, well-known corporate markets. It would be things like Palo Alto, San Francisco is a big one, obviously. And then you have Chicago to a little bit lesser extent. And then certain types of capital markets work are very popular in North Carolina. But the biggest markets are typically where all that work is going. And so it just, that you're always better off working with the best firms, biggest firms, as long as you can. And then also, if you can, become a partner there to get those types of jobs. Okay. Someone else asked, will the recording of this presentation be available online? Yes, they're all available. They're typically available within a day or two online. Yeah, but if you have any questions, you can always just email us or whatever to sign up, and we'll send you the link. I'm curious how other former big law attorney in-house counsel have negotiated their salary comp at their in-house role. It's not the lockstep type comp we're used to at the firm, so I'm curious what has been done to maximize compensation. Obviously, each company is different, and in-house compensation is often less than big law and raw dollar figures, but curious nonetheless. It depends on the place that where you're at. So in-house counsel, typically you can negotiate, many times you can negotiate getting equity. You can also negotiate your salary to some extent. The problem with a lot of in-house counsel is that in many roles, a lot of the work that's done will be given to law firms, and then they'll give the less sophisticated work to their in-house counsel, and the law firm will bring in-house counsel because they'll want to save money in a lot of routine work. So I had in our webinar yesterday, someone brought up the question that they were in-house and they were working on what were they saying? They were something about they went in-house and now they were working on all these NDAs, and they had all this experience, and now they felt like they should look for a new job because they had these great qualifications, and all they were doing was NDAs. Well, the reason the person was only doing NDAs is because the most in-house companies will give the less sophisticated routine work to their in-house counsel. Not all of them, but they have different categories of people in-house. But for young attorneys, will give their kind of, so they don't have to pay a law firm to do it. You need to be careful, is my point, in terms of where you put your effort and what kind of in-house job you have. My advice would be you can do a very good job negotiating your compensation if you move away from being a commodity doing work to someone that's very helpful on the business side of things, or doing the more sophisticated work that they would have to pay a lot of money to in-house, and then or to an outside attorney. So that's the first thing, because that's going to give you a lot of leverage. The second thing that I would recommend if you're in-house in order to negotiate your compensation is to figure out what people are making in similar roles. And then, to the extent you can, making people in the firm aware of that. And many times, if your company is very successful, they're not going to have a problem raising your compensation, but that's how I would approach that. Okay, that's a good question. And then one more. And then if anybody has any others, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, okay. I am in a niche, junior in a niche transactional group, and I'm interested in lateraling into a position for a more general corporate practice, M&A capital markets. Do you know how about how to go about doing this, or if any firms would be open to talking to someone like this. Yeah, so I think this looks like a very similar question to one I answered yesterday, but I will answer this. So you typically, if you're trying to lateral into another practice group like that, what I would recommend is you always want to. Your best option is going to be to, if you want to lateral into a more general, is not necessarily to work in a larger market, but to work in a smaller firm in your market or in a smaller market. So typically the biggest jobs will be for people that are looking for, so the biggest markets will typically want specialists, like you're in a niche transactional group, and the biggest firms will typically want specialists. Smaller markets will hire more generalists. So it's very rare, for example, for a firm like in Omaha or most parts of even Georgia or, Louisiana, to hire an attorney in corporate that doesn't do M&A and all sorts of different things in general corporate, even the largest firms, because they don't have enough work most times in the specialized groups. And then, so niche practices are typically more common at smaller firms, or general corporate practice is going to be more common at smaller firms. And then also in smaller markets, in large firms and smaller markets. Certainly a firm like Proskauer in Louisiana, where they actually have an office in New Orleans, is probably not going to be doing a lot of general corporate work, but most big firms are well. Okay, let me see. So let's see here. Oh, this is a good question. This is about diversity, which always fun. So how can law firms maintain diversity among associates, and what can law firms do to prevent diverse associates from leaving or experiencing job dissatisfaction? So I have written a book about diversity, which I would love. It's called, I think if you just search for the term law firm diversity, Harrison Barnes, you can find the book. It's online and it's free. And I had a nice time writing it. It took me about 6 months. And so there's quite a bit to do in terms of how do you maintain diversity among associates, and how can you prevent them from leaving and experiencing dissatisfaction early on. So there's a lot of, but this is a whole, huge question. So I would really recommend, if you're interested in this, reading my book. But the biggest thing that I think that I've noticed in all of my interviews with diverse associates, and then also with law firms, is that what happens in a lot of law firms is there's stuff called unconscious bias, which is, I'll just kind of write a couple of these out. There's unconscious bias. And then there's also unconscious bias, and then there's another one that I wanted to bring up. And then there's, I don't know, working with similar people. So a lot of times what'll happen is there's unconscious bias. So if someone from your same background, like if I know someone that's very similar to myself and I'm working with someone that's very similar, I will recognize a lot of things in myself and them. And if that person's not carrying their weight, I may push them along. And that may be someone, for example, if someone is from my hometown and they're suddenly working in Los Angeles and they're also from Detroit, and we grew up in a similar neighborhood and have a similar background, I'm going to take them under my wing and help them because I'm going to have a lot in common with them. And so what often happens inside of law firms is the same thing happens with partners giving out work. They will work with similar people to them, and they'll be more comfortable working with associates that have a similar background, because they'll feel like they have a lot of they share stuff, and the person can recognize themselves in them. So when you have a situation like you have in law firms, where you have a lot of people from certain ethnic backgrounds working together that may be primarily white, or then that there's going to be a bias towards people that are like them. So that the first thing I think that law firms can do to really combat that is to give people, and that you can do this with all associates, but for different types of diverse associates, really pair them with people that can be their mentors and can help them in terms of access to work, and then also helping them with assignments and stuff, and making sure that they get work. The problem is, one of the things that I noticed that would create a lot of problems for attorneys of different groups when they were different. And diversity can mean a lot of things. It can mean being the only woman in a firm. It can be meaning being a certain race, and being the only person of a certain race in a firm, a certain sexual orientation, handicap, whatever. But another thing that happens is people will reach conclusions about different types of people. Let's say, that someone is from a certain background, and you give them an assignment, and they come back and they don't do a good job. Traditionally, what would happen if the person is a similar background as you, then you would probably sit down and spend a lot of time coaching the person, telling them what they're doing wrong, and really trying to help them. If they're not from a similar background, what a lot of people will do is they just won't give that person assignments anymore. And so that's where the unconscious bias comes in. So I think if you're in a recruiting role inside of a law firm, you need to be very careful. And I think that the conversation should always be steered towards, we need to make sure that we're bringing all of our people up to speed in the same way, and so forth. The other thing is that a lot of times there's networks inside of law firms and inside of all organizations of people that are sharing information. Like, and associates may all get together and share information about where to get the assignments, or what partners are good to work for, and so forth. And if someone's not part of that group because they're part of a group that's not getting access to that information, that can hurt them. And they could not be part of that group because they're diverse, or there could be other reasons. But so you want to make sure that people get access to information about opportunities, about that the unconscious biases, and because everyone deep down wants to do well. Everybody's trying hard, and not everybody's the same intelligence, dependent regardless, and has as much to contribute. So that's really how I would recommend setting up programs and basically telling people to not leave anybody behind. The biggest thing is, if someone doesn't have enough work, you have to figure out why they don't have enough work. If people aren't giving them work, you need to figure out why people aren't giving them work. And then someone needs to sit down with that person and talk to them about whatever issues that they had. And the thing is that these kind of conversations, when I was practicing, like, I had friends and I would sit down with them and I would tell them like all the stuff they were doing wrong in their work, and there were informal networks, and people would do the same with me. And so if you don't have access to that many times from partners, and you don't have access to that from other associates, that can be a problem. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And then making sure that people have true mentors in the firm is always a good thing. So those are some of the things that I would recommend. And it is very difficult because there's lots of people that come into law firms and want to do well and don't succeed. And it's not necessary. It's not just people that are diverse. It's all sorts of people. And sometimes they just don't have the social skills, or whatever, but they have a lot to offer. So you need to make sure that they're paired with the right people. And you also need to hire people that are good matches for your firm. You can't hire everybody that comes along. You need to hire people that that have an interest in what you're offering. But diversity is very important. It's important for companies to have diverse attorneys working for them. It's important for attorneys working inside of law firms to have other diverse attorneys. And it's a very important thing for everyone. Those are some suggestions. But that's a great question. I appreciate it. Okay, I think those are the questions. And I appreciate everyone coming to this. And next week we'll do the same thing. So next week is about, we've done 3 parts of this, 3 parts of the webinar. We've done, there are articles and other webinars that you should be able to find online, but there's, can you do the job? There's, can you be managed, and do you want the job? And then next week, which is exciting, will be, is a person a good cultural fit? We'll talk about that. And that's a whole can of worms, but I think that'll be a very useful webinar for everyone as well. Thank you. And we will talk next week.